Since October 7th, communities across Israel have faced unprecedented challenges, with religious leaders often serving on the front lines of emotional and spiritual support. Today, we're speaking with Rabbi Zev Rosenfeld, the Chief Rabbi of Talmon, a community that has lost 4 soldiers in the current war. As an Anglo-Rabbi leading an Israeli yeshuv, Rabbi Rosenfeld brings a unique perspective to his role. A graduate of the Barkai Rabbinical Training Program, he has found himself navigating the complex landscape of community leadership during wartime. In Talmon, where nearly every family has a soldier serving and the entire community grapples with loss and uncertainty, Rabbi Rosenfeld's role extends far beyond the synagogue walls. From supporting bereaved families and tending to the needs of soldiers' loved ones, to guiding the community's youth through trauma, his experience offers a window into how religious leaders are helping their communities navigate these challenging times. Join us as we explore how one community rabbi is helping his kehillah face the daily challenges of war, loss, and resilience. Welcome to Defining Moments. This is Rabbi David Fine, and it's my pleasure to host today Rabbi Zev Rosenfeld. Rabbi Zev, can I call you Rabbi Zev?
Sure.
He is the rabbi of Talmon, a yeshuv, a settlement not so far from here. So first of all, welcome, Rabbi Rosenfeld.
Thank you very much for having me.
Could you tell us just a little about yourself before we get started?
Sure. I grew up in Toronto. I was in Toronto until age 17, finished high school. Came from a year in Israel. Instead of being here for just a year, I stayed for many years, and here I am. I went to YU a little bit, went to York University in Toronto a little bit. And now I've been the rabbi for 4 years in Talmon. I was a volunteer for another 4 years back. So, Sachel, 8 years as a rabbi of Talmon.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about Talmon for those people who don't know much about it?
It's a nice yeshuv. We have about 320 families. Beautiful hilltop with a beautiful view overlooking the whole area of Tel Aviv, right above Modi'in, in Yehuda v'Shomron. Very, very important, strategically placed.
And how did you become the rabbi of Talmon?
Truth is, I've been there for about 20 years. And 12 years after I was there, the previous rabbi, who became the chief rabbi of the police force,
Rabbi Rami Berchayahu.
Right, so he couldn't do both jobs, so he asked me to step in, and I was voted in, and I was accepted.
Part of the reason that I ask you that is because it's unusual for a Anglo-Rabbi, somebody who grew up in the United States, or in your case in Toronto, becoming a Rav of such an important yeshuv. So that's why I was very interested. Do you think that had anything to do with it?
I don't think so. I think it's just a tremendous chut that I, used to grow up playing basketball and watching Toronto Blue Jays or Maple Leaf hockey in Toronto, and now I'm the rabbi of a yeshuv in Israel, in Yehuda v'Shomron. I think it's a tremendous chut. And I don't know if it's because I came from North America, but it's definitely something that I'm proud of, and it brings a different flavor to my rabbanut, I think.
The reason, or part of the reason at least, why I wanted to have you come in here today and for you to be on the podcast was because during this war, the focus, especially in the media, a lot of the times is on the heroes, right? The soldiers who die in battle, the hostages, the families, the orphans, the widows. And obviously, they're very big heroes. But I think that there are other heroes that their names may not be in the lights. They're a little bit more behind the scenes, but they're very important in terms of the war, as well as ongoing trying to just live life as we hopefully at some point leave this war. And I think that the rabbi is a very important person in this whole in this situation, meaning you have a yeshuv, like you said, of around 300 and something families. And in many ways, you probably have social workers and a rakezet, kehillah, whatever it may be. But in many ways, you're at the top of the pyramid. And you are the one who, in many ways, is responsible to support the people that need the support during this war. And we know that there are many, many people who need support. So I want to ask you about a few groups in your yeshuv. First of all, you have hundreds of soldiers that are from your yeshuv fighting in this war. True?
First of all, thank you for thinking of me as a hero. I don't see myself as a hero, but I see myself in a position where I am able to touch people in times of war, everybody where it hits them. So yes, we have 320 families in the yeshuv. I would say almost every family had a member of their family at war. whether it's the husband, whether it's a son-in-law. At the height of the war, I think more than half of the yeshuv was at war. And the wives or the kids and some of those people at war were even grandparents, and their sons were at war alongside them. So we had to make sure that everyone's thought of. I wrote WhatsApps to every chayal the day the war began, as they left, meeting them on their base with a WhatsApp just to show them that I'm with them and wishing them well and keeping in touch with them. Whenever they came back for time, either during the week or on Shabbat, in training, you come back on Shabbat, but in the war, you come back whenever you can. And whenever I saw them in shul or saw them in the streets, I made a point to go over and hear what they're up to. We had a whole team working on helping the wives who were left with kids at home, or mothers who had their sons at war and not sleeping at night, waiting, or hopefully not waiting, but nervous they would get that famous knock on the door. So we had to have teams taking care of all the different groups of people, and it was a yeshuv at war.
So when you say taking care of the people, that sounds very general. Could you give us a little bit more in terms of specifics? What does it mean to take care of the wives, to take care of the other children?
So we had a staff, a team that had a whole Google Docs of all the chayalim that were at war and their wives. And whenever they were finished their miluim, they were taken off because their wife now has her husband back. But that list, we had people making sure they had food taken care of, given to them. If she was at work and their children were coming home from school, we had girls coming home from school early to go help with the little kids. We made sure that they got attention. They didn't feel that they're struggling alone, because you could feel so alone and not understand that you're in a community. The beauty of a community is that you're really not alone, even though you're going through a tough time. But we made sure that no one is alone.
The soldiers themselves, you said you WhatsApped them and you tried to relate to them when they were able to come home. Did you get a lot of shailas or questions from them? Did they seek you out?
Sure. There's halacha all year long, and then there's halachot of war. Many, many different questions came up. For instance, on Shabbat, if they had a chance to come home on Shabbat, but they would have to drive, could they come home? Or if they had a chance to come home before Shabbat, but they were told to come back on Shabbat. So the answers were based on what the Rabbanut HaTzva'it said, and what also my peers, for instance, in WhatsApp groups of Barkai or other rabbi groups that we have. So we discussed the issues, and there was no one answer. Everyone got their answer based on what they needed and their situation in the war. But tons of questions that were war related. Yeah, that's for sure. And
besides the war related questions, did any of them reach out to you in terms of just talking because they were stressed, because they were nervous, because they just needed somebody to talk to?
Sometimes they come to me, but sometimes when I meet them on the streets or meet them in shul and have a little schmooze after shul, if you press the right buttons and if you ask the right questions, they open up. Some of them are really strong, but some of them, being out of the house for so long, there were real issues. We're coming back home, whether it's with their spouse or with their kids or at work, because some of them were doing real life-saving jobs and tasks at war. And then if they came back after months in miluim and months at war, and they had to go back to their paper-pushing jobs, they felt they weren't doing anything so important. They were frustrated at work. Or if at home, their families pretty much for a few months learned how to manage without them. And all of a sudden, dad comes back and they have to make room for him. And it wasn't always easy. It's not always easy in zugiyut. It's not always easy for the person to come home. And first of all, the army was very good. This time around, they gave them sessions after they finished their months of miluim. They sat them down in some conference hall and gave them 2 full days or 3 full days of sessions with psychologists and others. But even so, we had to walk them through it, and we had to send them to the right therapists if needed. That was definitely part of my job.
I'd ask you, too, about the families, not only the soldiers. You said before that there were Google Docs and food and people making sure that the kids were watched. And again, that's all very, very important. But in many ways, that's very technical. It's very helpful, but in many ways, it's very technical. Did the family members seek you out to talk to you and talk about the stresses, which in some ways are similar to the soldier stresses, but in many ways very different because they're not fighting a war. They're nervous waiting at home.
So my wife, Baruch Hashem, Shoshi, is also my partner in the job, and we also have social workers, and we also have other people in the yeshuv available for discussions like that. We made ourselves available, and whoever wanted to approach us, they did. We also made events. We made events to celebrate the Chayalim. I think we made a Siyum Seder Noshim on Dov Yomi. So on Motzei Shabbos, we made a Melava Malka. We had a guest speaker, and at the end of that evening, all the Chayalim that were in for that weekend we were saluted. We gave them a gift. Purim night, we made a whole Purim party, but at a certain point, we also saluted the Chayalim. We tried to salute the women that their wives, that their husbands were out at war, so they had evenings for the women to come and, to get a massage and to get some time off, and we arranged babysitters so that women can come out. So we had a whole arrangement for people to feel that they can approach us, but also we initiated ideas to help them.
Now, you were used to, before the war, taking care of people as well and supporting people. And it sounds like once the war started, you spent most of your time, if not all of your time, on the people that were affected by the war. But what about, I'm sure there were people that were not necessarily affected by the war. Of course, the war is in the air, and the stress and the tension hits everybody, even if you're not fighting in the war, you're not a family of a member of a soldier fighting in the war. But were you able to support them as well?
I can think about the youth in our yeshuv. And if I can compare myself growing up in Toronto, and I don't think I had anybody die except for my friends' grandparents. Death wasn't a thing. We grew up in a very nice childhood, played sports, went to sports games, and went to school. And the youth in my yeshuv, they had their brothers and their fathers went to war, and 4 members of our yeshuv, 4 sons of our yeshuv, were killed at battle, and I had to really think of the youth and understand that they're going through a war. They're going through the frightening times of their brothers and parents and fathers not at home, and they're losing members of their yeshuv, and they're growing up in the shadow of death. It's a totally different kind of childhood than most of us had growing up, especially in America. So there were times that I approached the youth. We call them the Noar, pretty much. The truth is, I remember right at the beginning of the war, a few months into it, we had a time that we called all the little children of the fathers at war, and I had a shmooze with them. And then there were times that I took the youth, the high school kids, for a shmooze, either every age group by itself, 9th grade and 10th grade, and met them, or as a whole. That's definitely a group of the yeshuv which we had to think of, that they're going through a difficult time in the war, and it's not so simple that they come to Har Herzl to bury their neighbors. It's not a normal childhood.
So you mentioned the 4 soldiers that fell from Talmon, and we'll get to that in a minute. That's a very important part of this discussion. But a few questions before we get there. Now, you've talked about a staff. So are you at the head of that pyramid, or what happens in the yeshuv in terms of staff?
So I'm glad you asked that, because the beauty of a yeshuv, especially once we became more experienced, was that we have a whole system. It's a community. I'm not sure how it works in the city, but we have a system where we have an emergency rescue team for times of emergency, and they set in within a split second if there's an emergency, whether it's war-related or otherwise. And there's a social worker, and there's a member of the board, and there are people with positions that are there, and they set up what they call a chamal. They set up a room from which they control the irua, the event going on. So if it's a one-time thing, so it's a quick 24-hour irua that we set up teams and go to work.
So you said rescue, but you really mean like an emergency response team.
I'm sorry, right. Yes, emergency response team. So if it's a 1 day, two day thing, so then people move into mode. If it's over months, so we had to have members of the yeshuv that weren't at war volunteer. Who's going to help the wives of the chayalim? Who's going to help the mothers of the chayalim? Who's going to set up the shiva house for the chayal that fell? And over time, different volunteers step in and step out and help along.
But are you at the head of that pyramid, or?
I am on the religious, spiritual side of that triangle, I guess you call it pyramid. I don't know if I'm at the head of the pyramid because I'm the spiritual member, spiritual leader. I'm sorry, I'm the spiritual leader. A yeshuv has other leaders that are more, let's say, experienced or professional in their field. They leave me to be the spiritual leader, but I do think that my wife also has a large part in the leadership of that chesed. A lot of it is just somebody who's going to put the chesed as the first priority, and my wife also definitely steps into that.
But you've
position.
spoken about the closeness of the yeshuv, so I imagine that even though you're the spiritual leader and they're the more professional, I imagine that everyone works together.
Exactly. We have a team. We have a WhatsApp group. We're always in touch with each other. It looks like this family needs a little bit more of attention. It looks like this family is okay now. We're always in touch. And I'm definitely part of that team that's on the top of the pyramid.
Now, you talked about the difference between your growing up in Toronto and the youth that is growing up today amidst this war. I want to ask you a question about that because I live in Modi'in, and in my synagogue also there are hundreds of soldiers fighting in the war. And obviously there are issues. Obviously there's tension. Obviously there's stress. But sometimes you don't really see it outwardly. A lot of times it seems like everything's normal. So how do you necessarily get to the people or really know who the people are that need it and get to them in a way that's effective?
The minute I moved into my position from day one, which was way before the war began, in my shiurim, also to the women and also to the men, I said, I need you to be my ears and my antennas. And then if anybody's going through a difficult time, whether it's the grandfather who's in the hospital and the mother of the family is with the grandfather and the husband and kids are left at home for Shabbos every 2 weeks. So just last week, a lady called and said, this family was my neighbor. This is what they're going through. Make sure that the yeshuv knows about them. So people are my antennas, people are my ears, and it works. People come to me and people come to the the other positions in the yeshuv. And we have, just last week or 2 weeks ago, someone sent me a WhatsApp of one of the members of the yeshuv status. And he was concerned because that status raised a question mark in that other member's eyes. And he said, take a look, see if there's something going on in that family. So people know to turn to me, and it's actually beautiful. It's heartwarming to know that people care about other families. And thank God people see me as an address, and then I go and check out how the family is doing.
That is beautiful. And like you said at the beginning, when you were talking about not being a hero, but that you had an opportunity to help and be part of a real community, that shows that you're very effective. So that's very, very pleasing to hear. I wanted to talk about all of that because I see that in many ways as the background. Obviously, it's very important background, but a lot of times people, especially people that don't live in Israel, again, see the headlines, see the news, and when a soldier falls, they see the levaya, the funeral at Har Herzl. They see the shiva. They see articles about how he fell in battle, but they don't really understand all of the background that you're talking about that needs to go on. And it's not just details. It's very important background in order to really support the family. And we all know that these families need so much support. So like you said before, you had 4 soldiers that fell from Talmon, and God should only help that there shouldn't be any others. Mm-hmm. So before we get into the details of how you support them, I think people are interested to know, I know that I'm interested to know, how do you find out? How does the family find out? And how do you find out? And what do you do during like the first 24 to 48 hours in order to help them?
So here I think it is different in the yeshuv and in the city. I don't know who the army approaches when they knock on the door when they come to a family in a city. But we have that emergency response team. The way it works is every yeshuv in Yehuda v'Shamron has a yellow gate at the entrance. When the army comes with its 3 soldiers, 3 officers to come to announce to a family that their chayal was killed, they stop outside our gate, make a call to the person who's in charge of that emergency response team, and they say, this is the family, we're coming into the yeshuv now. Please tell me where he lives. We're on our way. And then, unfortunately, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, but because, 4 times this happened. The person that got the call calls me, and I go straight to the house. The way it works is they always send an ambulance to stand outside the house in case one of the members of the family has a terrible reaction. And then the 3 soldiers go in. I'm outside the house. And then when they finish telling the family with the official announcement, I step in, and I'm there within just a few minutes after them getting the news. It's the most devastating thing. And I don't even think that they understand as much as they will in the next few days, because it's still a shock, and they're still in the stage of, denying. First of all, there's denial stage, can't be. Then there's the stage where they understand, but they're trying to fight the idea, and then it settles in. But that initial shock is the time that I'm there.
So I want to ask you, you go in right after the soldiers inform them, and there's all that shock. What could you possibly say that will be effective at that moment?
First, I'd like to say how I cope with myself, because I want to fall apart with the family. It's devastating. Somehow I pull myself together and say, now I'm b'tafkid. Now I'm at task. My job is just to be there, to give them hugs. There's nothing I can say. I don't have any words. In Hebrew, we say en milim. Ki bemet en milim. There's nothing I can say. But me being there, I've seen, experience has taught me, is a calming effect. Obviously, I teach them the hilchot of avilut or onein before the burial, but that's later. First, they have to get over the initial shock, and they have to make all their phone calls. They have to make sure that all the members of the family know before it goes out in an official announcement to the yeshuv or an official announcement to the press. But that's the army's job. The army has learned that they can't announce anything until all the members of the family that they want to know through them are informed first. And I just sit there. And sometimes they ask me things. Sometimes they just give a hug. And
how long do you stay with them?
If I feel that they need their space, so I step out. And either I step out and stay outside, or I go home and then I come back. But I'm pretty much there from the time that they're announced until they go to sleep at night. Usually when the yeshuv announces it to the yeshuv, friends and neighbors start coming in, and then I'm there. And then usually they have to make halachic decisions and practical decisions. The army has a whole list of questions: how to bury, when to bury, where to bury, how the kever should look, how the procedure of the levaya should be. Many, many technical questions, but so I'm there for that. Some families have me actually sit in the closed room with the chayalim and the family, so that if they have any questions or if they need any moral support, I'm with them. Some families preferred me not to be in the room, and what each family is, what they prefer is fine. It's a time where you don't judge anybody. No one's prepared for such a moment, and it's always new and shocking. I just respect whatever they want at the time. And also, as I've had more experience, I know what questions to anticipate. And then sometimes I can tell them in advance, this question may come up, think about it. And then when things start quieting down, they want quiet by themselves, and they usually think about what to say at a hesped for the following day when the funeral's the next day. I go home and start thinking about my hesped. I've actually said 4 hespedim in Har Herzl. Har Herzl for me is a difficult place. It has become a difficult place. I used to go to Har Herzl all the time. On Yom HaZikaron, I take students there. I think that's a very, very important place to be. I'm a high school Rebbe also. So every year I take my students there on Yom HaZikaron. We've taken them on tours of of Har Herzl. But Har Herzl has taken a whole new meaning for me, because I have to be with the family at the hardest moment and actually say words of hesped at a fresh grave, and to prepare such a hesped. It's a tremendous task, because you have to talk about the boy, you have to talk about the family, you have to talk about the Mesirat Nefesh that the boy had, and I also have to talk to my yeshuv, because every time my yeshuv has another casualty like this, in the meantime, we've had 4 chayalim killed, and there was another, in this whole time span, another chayal that was just finished in the army, but he was killed in a pigua, not in the army, but he was a chayal till 2 weeks before, and he was killed in a pigua.
So really 5.
5, yes, and another girl, age 21, died from cancer, all in this past year. So the yeshuv sort of has gone through a time of death of children. So every time I speak at Har Herzl, I also take a few moments to talk to the yeshuv and to say we're a strong yeshuv, we're a yeshuv of life, not a yeshuv of death. Har Herzl is a meaningful place, but it also has a haunted side to it for me.
You said before that you're the spiritual leader, and you talked about a lot of the things that various people, including you and Shoshi, do in order to make things better for people, the food and the chesed. But talking about being a spiritual leader, you just said a moment ago that you talk about Talmon being a settlement of life, but you're a spiritual leader. How do you carry the yeshuv during these very difficult times? 5 deaths from the war, a girl, a 21-year-old dying of cancer. What do you say on a week-to-week basis? How do you talk to people in a way that could lift them up?
The truth is, after quite a few years, I don't know, not so many, maybe 8 years of preparing drushos for every Friday night, or Shabbos Hagadol, or Shabbos Shuvah drushos, where in the past, you find a nice vort, and you think of something that's meaningful to talk to the people where they're at now, and then you say a Dvar Torah and sit down. In the past year and a quarter, I can't just say a vort. You have to understand what the people are going through. You have to understand what the Jewish people in Israel are going through. And I've been finding it much harder to find ways to always connect what I'm saying to what we're going through. Whether it was times where we had to say Mizmor LeTodah because we killed Sinwar and people jumped to the streets of Motzei Yontiv of Sukkot and they were dancing in the streets. And there are times where we actually added Mizmor LeTodah to the Tefillah, and there were times where we were with casualties, and we had to say words of nichama. But definitely my drashot are different, and I have to really work hard to find the right words to say. But Baruch Hashem, it's Siyata D'Shmaya, and you find the right words into individuals and speaking in public.
You were getting emotional before, but do you mind telling us just in one sentence a little bit about each of the soldiers that got killed from Talmon?
Sure. The very first day of the war, we have 2 parts of yeshuv, the 2 hilltops in Yehuda v'Shamron. As many hilltops as we can take over, we have a chain of Jewish presence on as many hilltops as we can. So we have a yeshuv that started Talmon in one hilltop, and then a little bit higher, within walking distance, we have another neighborhood in Neve Talmon. So every Shabbos I am in both places. I do a lot of walking on Shabbos.
When you say take over, you mean legally, right?
Yeah. Yes, of course. So I remember that morning, on Simchat Torah morning, I had to walk between both areas and announce that there's a war going on. And there was a family who, Itzik Fitusi is the father's name. It was his 50th birthday on Simchat Torah. And he understood that there's a war down south, and he knew that his son is down there on a base. And he wasn't sure if he could continue dancing. He wasn't sure what's going on with his son. And then on Motzei Shabbos, we heard, first of all, there was another chayal who was in shul that morning, and half of my shul emptied out, whether it was adults or chayalim, they emptied out in the middle of shul to go to battle. And right after Havdalah, the first thing you heard was another chayal was Murdam v'muncham. How do you say that in English?
Yeah, I don't even know.
Yeah, he was put to sleep in order to keep him safe.
He was sedated. I think that's how you say it. Yeah.
And at first we were very nervous that was a bad sign, and so that was the initial shock that Yeshuv went into, until we understood that he's okay. His leg was injured until today. His leg was injured. We also have other chayalim throughout the war that have been injured from Talmud. But that was the initial shock. But only later on that night, when all the families tried to make contacts with their chayalim that were on base, and the Fitusi family wasn't able to contact him, so we understood that something happened. And it took until Monday for them to hear anything, because Shura was full of so many bodies.
Shura is the army base where they process and identify the bodies and prepare them for burial.
And only on Wednesday, was he officially identified. And on Thursday, we had the first levaya for Yishai Pitusi, who was a Chayal in Golani. So that was a long time. From Shabbos until Thursday, that was the longest, I think, of the families that went through such a difficult time even before the burial, and then 7 more days of Shiva. And then that was right away, first week. Right after Hanukkah, another Chayal who grew up in a yeshuv, he just got married and he had a child on 3 months before.
And his name?
His name was Maoz Fenigstein. Hashem Yikom Damo. He was killed in Gaza right after Hanukkah. And then that was immediate. He got the knock on the door and it was an announcement, and unfortunately immediately killed. 2 months later, right before Purim, an American family that made Aliyah years ago. It's funny to call them an American family because they've been in Israel for years. Their son, Maoz Morel, who was in the Sayeret of Tzanchanim, he was injured. And then there was a Thursday night, and I quickly ran to the hospital, and he was out until Monday, out of consciousness. Yeah, and on Monday he passed away, and then again the Vayas and Sitting Shiva, and the last one was just now from Purim until Hanukkah. Well, we had that Chayal killed in a pigua and the girl who died from cancer, but it was from the war side. It was quiet. We had some injuries, but just now, right before Hanukkah now, my neighbor, the family named Diener, their son Hillel, he was killed in Gaza, and it was a one-day kind of announcement. First, they told him they were injured, that he was injured. Then, within a few hours, they understood that he was dead.
Like you said, Hashem Yikom Damam, we should always remember them and for a blessing. You said before when I asked you about what could you possibly say, given that initial shock, and you said that you're basically just there. That's what any practical rabbinics course would tell a rabbi to do in that situation. Ba'asher hu sham, just to be there. And we taught in Barkai. Barkai is the program that trains rabbis that I founded and that Rabbi Zev participated in. We learned a lot about chaplaincy. And a bedrock principle of chaplaincy is not to always talk, just to listen. And I often say about Barkai that the most important thing that we teach rabbis how to do is exactly what you're talking about, how to be there and how to just listen. But that's very, very difficult, especially in a world today where everyone is always talking. Listening is very, very difficult, I always say, because you're often thinking about what you're going to answer instead of focusing on what the person is saying. So don't you see that as being difficult? Don't you think that maybe sometimes you feel like you have to give some kind of answer about why this happened, what to do next? Or do you find it easy to just, be there?
As I said before, when I come into that situation, I sort of put myself in task mode and I sort of separate my sechel and my regesh, my emotional side and my logical side. My emotional side wants to ask all the questions and to help them answer all the questions. Maybe it's not healthy for my mental state, but I sort of move into, okay, I'm in a job here. I'm in a task, and I have to do what's good for them. And even though rabbis like to talk or ask questions to invoke responses, in this case, that's not my job. My job is just to be there. I don't think that they also want answers to those kinds of, rational or imuna belief. Where's God? Why is he doing this to me? That'll come later. I did find myself later on, either during Shiva or after Shiva. Usually during Shiva, there's swamps with visitors and people coming to be Menachem Avel. Afterwards, when things quiet down, that's when I step in again. And then their questions come up, and then we talk and make sure that all of their kids are taken care of, because the parents have to take care of themselves, but also each kid has to be observed to make sure that they are they're stable. That's where I step in, and then I'm, more verbal, more concerned about their health physically and mentally, spiritually, and emotionally.
Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago your own mental health, and You're talking about giving so much and helping families so much in very, very difficult situations. What do you do about yourself? Do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of yourself? Like you said before, you're on the tafkid, but you have to make sure that you could take care of yourself so you could be there for other people.
First of all, it's siyata d'shmaya. But I'm not going to hide it. It's not without its toll. It has a toll. For families like that, and trying to keep the spirits of the yeshuv high. And isn't there a story about the Rebbe that used to sweat every time and used to take off the jacket and put on the jacket every time a new family came in to talk to him? A Rebbe, I forget exactly the story. He sat all day long and listened to everybody's stories that they came to tell him. And then every time he took off his jacket and put on their jacket to feel what they're going through. That's what I feel, that every time this happens, I move into the family and I become part of the family as much as they allow me. And it is emotionally draining. Baruch Hashem, my wife, Shoshi, is a good place. It's a good place for me to share my thoughts. And siyata d'shmaya.
Well, Hashem should continue to give you your help, the help that you need in order to continue to face, these challenges. You spoke before about when you prepare a eulogy, when you prepare a hesped, that you talk about a lot of things. And one of those things you spoke about was the mesirut nefesh, the dedication and the willingness to give up one's life of these soldiers. So talk a little bit about that mesirut nefesh.
I'm very glad you asked me to talk about that. There's a Gemara in Brachot that says that when there were two generations. One generation looked at the previous generation and said, why did they get so many miracles and we don't get so many miracles? They thought, is it because they learn more Torah than we do? And they said, no, we learn more Torah than them. So why do they deserve more miracles? The Gemara reaches the conclusion that the previous generation got more miracles because they acted in mesirut nefesh. What does that mean? Why does mesirut nefesh bring miracles? So, based on a Maharal, I learned from Rav Drukman, my Rosh Yeshiva, the following idea. A miracle, by definition, is defying nature, breaking nature. So if by nature the water flows and Kriyat Yamsuf opened the waters, that's a miracle because it defies nature. Human nature is to defend yourself. If anybody were to throw a punch my way, I would try and move my head or raise my hand to push off the fist. Human nature is to defend themselves. Human nature is to think about me. When a person stops thinking about themselves and thinks about either other people or an ideology that he believes in, that's at his own expense, that's against human nature, because human nature is always to think about yourself. So the Gemara says, that's mesirut nefesh. Mesirut nefesh means that there's an idea that I believe in, that I'm willing to give up thinking about myself for that idea, even though it's against nature. And therefore, the Maharal says, mesirut nefesh brings miracles because they're both against nature. And I think that when our chayalim go to war, the most natural thing for people would be to say, I have a wife at home, I have kids at home, I have parents at home. Today's world, everyone thinks about themselves. Me, and my rights. It's my right. Everyone has their own interest and is going to fight for getting their rights and their interest. To go to war, by definition, is not thinking about yourself, not defending yourself, but putting yourself in a position where your life is at stake. For what? For an idea that I believe in, and it's called Am Yisrael, who has the right to live in Eretz Yisrael safely. It's the privilege to fight, to have the Jewish people live in the land that God gave us. And even if it means giving up my life for that idea. That mesirut nefesh is what the Jewish people in Israel, I believe, really live daily. In Israel, we don't think about ourselves. We think about what's good for the Jewish people. Everyone that goes to the army, every girl that goes to Shurut Leumi, instead of going and finding the quickest career so they can start making money and working in a profession, they give up years of their lives to serve the country, because in this country, we don't live for ourselves. We live for the good of the people. That's called mesirut nefesh. And there's mesirut nefesh to different degrees. The highest degree of mesirut nefesh is being willing to give up your life. And I think that the chayalim that didn't die, Baruch Hashem, weren't less moser nefesh. They were willing to be moser nefesh just as much as the people that actually were moser nefesh.
I want to ask two questions before we end. I was going to ask a lot more about Bar Kai because I can't do a podcast without getting it in there somehow. But at the beginning of Bar Kai, we took rabbis that did not yet have jobs in synagogues. And very quickly, we realized that it was almost a waste because if you're not doing it, it's way too theoretical. So after the first or second cohort, we started taking only rabbis that have jobs because, like I said, the learning could be immediately applied. And when the rabbis are learning, they understand the issues better than somebody who is not yet working. So it sounds to me that you have been almost learning on the job in terms of how to approach a lot of these very difficult dilemmas and challenges that you've had during the war. But can you talk about whether the training that you did in Bar Kai, which was in a much calmer time, was that helpful to you during this period?
So I must say that what gives me what I feel is certain success in my job as the rabbi of the yeshuv, I can attribute it first of all to role models that I grew up with. I grew up in Toronto. My rabbi was Rabbi Raphael Marcus, Zichrono Livracha. I often think of what he did, and I often think what he would recommend that I do. He was a role model for me. I'm also a Rebbe in high school, like I said. It's part of the job. You have to also work. It's not enough parnasa in the rabbinate, so you have to have other jobs as well. I've been a Rebbe in high school for 30 years.
Where?
In Chashmonaim, there's a yeshiva Bnei Akiva near Tamid, and I teach high school there. So I'm experienced in teaching Torah, and experienced with youth, and experienced in working with people that are in different stages of their life, seeking and different stages of their challenges in life. That definitely also helped me with my position. But I was very zochet to be 2 years in Bar Kai every Monday for 7 hours. It was a whole slew of different topics and areas, from halacha to psychology to palliative care, and all those things gave me different skills so that I can, at the right time, implement them in my job.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. I want to ask you one last question. You spoke about at the beginning about that you're zocha to be doing what you do. And we know that as rabbis, it can be very, very difficult at times. A lot of the difficulty you just spoke about, and that doesn't even reach the tip of the iceberg. It could be 24/7, dealing with all kinds of very, very messy, difficult problems. But I've always felt that, for myself, that there's a real deep satisfaction, a real, what we call in Hebrew, a sipuk hanefesh, that comes from doing this kind of work. I see that in you as well, that as hard as you're working, as difficult as these challenges are, that you're really able to apply your personality, to apply your skills, and to apply the very special person that you are. So talk about that sipuk hanefesh.
It's very real. It's a lot of sipuk nefesh. We have Bnei Akiva in our yeshuv, and every year there's a special Shabbat called Shabbat Irgun, where Bnei Akiva is celebrated, and Motzei Shabbat, the whole yeshuv comes out, and on the basketball court with stands, people come and watch their kids doing their shows and presentations, and I always speak there. And then as I'm sitting there, as I'm getting ready to go up and speak in front of the whole yeshuv, I say to myself, I don't know, I was just a little kid in Toronto, and here I have this zchut. It's a real zchut to stand in an Israeli yeshuv with hundreds of people that want to hear what I say. That's a tremendous sipuk. Last night we had another example where the noar, the youth, high school kids, boys and girls, since just a month ago, Hillel Diner Hashem Yikom Domo was killed. They said, we want to learn Mishnayot and finish Shas Mishnayot in his memory and the memory of all the 4 boys. So last night we worked on, for the past 2 weeks, I and the youth worked on planning this event. Last night we had an event. They made a siyum. The whole yeshuv was invited. They also had songs, almost like a hidva'adut. And I stood in front of the people that came, and I just felt that this is a tremendous chut, that they seeked me out to try and plan this program with them. And you see that somehow people are touched, and people are touched in the ways that you want them to be touched. And it's just the more times I have opportunities to see that it's touching people, it's just a tremendous hipuk nefesh.
Well, you talked about just a few minutes ago the Maharal and Mesirut Nefesh bringing along miracles. And then you said that the soldiers that didn't get killed have, just as much Mesirut Nefesh as the ones that do. So why? You said because they're thinking of others. So I'd just like to conclude by really complimenting and praising you, because by that definition, you're also a Moser Nefesh, because you're putting all the people in your yeshuv as your central interest. And so that should bring miracles for our people, for our world.
Amen.
And Hashem should only give you the strength that you need to continue to lead Talmon in the way that you've led it up till now. And as we know, life in Israel, life everywhere has its ups and downs. So we've had a major down, and so we look forward to the ups where you could come again and you could talk about your leadership during very, very joyous times. So we hope that happens very soon.
Thank you very much. I just want to give you one story.
Okay.
Which happened twice in the past. The same story happened twice in the past 2 months, and I think it's connected to what you're saying. The girl that died from cancer, she passed away on Yudalad Tishrei, the night before Sukkot. She was buried in Erev Sukkot. And the last chayal that was killed, he was killed 2 days before Hanukkah. And both families had to say Shechianu. The girl's family buried her in the morning and then had to say Shechianu sitting in the sukkah at night. The Chayal's family, Hillel Diner, they started sitting Shiva, and then the day later, they had to say Shechianu, lighting the candles.
On the first night of Hanukkah.
The first night of Hanukkah. And I knew that the word Shechianu v'kiyemanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh would be so difficult for them to say. How can you really say those words and mean it? Thank you for having us reach this moment.
In the middle of Shiva.
So I went over to each one of them in the time, and I said, I know this is going to be a difficult moment for you. And as hard as it is going to be to say those words, I'm giving you a hug, and I'm giving you chizuk that you should be able to say, Shechianu v'kiyemanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. So I'm reminded of that, because we need to be, not only in the times of death and challenges, we should also be able to live and say Shechianu and to have full identity with that, full identification with the idea of Shechianu. We're a yeshuv with life, and we're a nation with life. Am Yisrael Chai. So that's not just a slogan.
And we've seen that some poskim have said that you could even say Shechianu for when you see the release of the Chatufim. So we too should have opportunity to say Shechianu in the days and weeks ahead. But I really want to thank you for coming in. Some of this stuff is not very easy to talk about your inner thoughts. So I thank you very much for being with us today and really giving people a real inside look into what goes on sort of behind the scenes, especially with such a skilled rabbi as yourself. So I want to thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining me on Defining Moments. Remember to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star rating and a review. Please share this podcast with your friends who, like you, want to be inspired both by this period in Jewish and Israeli history and by the people who are making these defining moments happen. Let's not squander this unique opportunity. Maybe the next defining moment will be created by you or me. Until next time, I'm Rabbi David Fine.